The boardroom had never felt smaller. 12 faces stared at Nathaniel Blackwood across the mahogany table, each expression carved from the same granite disapproval that had greeted him when he'd walked through those doors 20 minutes ago. The accusations hung in the air like smoke after a fire. 8 counts of workplace harassment, $500 million vanished into offshore accounts bearing his name, and a company he'd built from his father's ashes, now teetering on the edge of collapse. Nate's fingers gripped the armrests of his chair, the leather groaning under the pressure. 47 years old, former Navy SEAL, self-made billionaire, and right now none of it mattered because the evidence spread across the conference table painted him as exactly the kind of man he'd sworn never to become. The door opened. Every head turned. Vivian Harper stepped into the room, her heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of a countdown. She wore the same Navy suit she'd worn on her first day as his secretary 72 hours ago. But the woman who'd flinched away from his touch then now moved with the certainty of someone holding a loaded weapon. She held up a USB drive. Her green eyes found his across the room, and Nate saw something there that made his pulse spike, not fear, not anger, but recognition. "I have proof," Viv said, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "Mr. Blackwood was framed." The image froze in Nate's mind, her standing there backlit by the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows offering salvation he didn't deserve. Then the memory rewound, pulling him backward through 72 hours of choices that had led to this moment. To understand how they'd arrived here, you had to go back to the beginning, to the slap, 72 hours earlier. The heavy bag swung back on its chain and Nate's fist connected again, knuckles splitting skin that had already bled and healed 100 times before. 5 in the morning and the gym was empty except for him and the ghost of muscle memory that still knew how to move, how to breathe, how to hurt something that couldn't hurt back. His coach's voice echoed from the corner, cigarette rough and knowing. "Still fighting ghosts, Nate?" The question didn't deserve an answer. Nate threw another combination jab cross-hook and felt the satisfying jolt travel up his arms. 3 years since Grace died. 3 years since the drunk driver walked away with a suspended sentence and a slap on the wrist, while Nate had to explain to his 16-year-old daughter why justice was just a word people used when they wanted you to stop asking questions. The bag steadied. Nate unwrapped his hands, the tape stained rust red, and headed for the showers. By 6, he was in his Tesla downtown Seattle, dissolving into view through the windshield as morning light turned the Space Needle into a silhouette. The radio played something forgettable. Nate's mind replayed something worse. Grace's laugh, the way she used to read in bed with one leg tucked under her, how she'd made him believe he could be better than the sum of his parts. He pulled up to Roosevelt High just as Isabel emerged from their building, backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds creating a force field around her teenage world. She slid into the passenger seat without looking at him. "Morning, sweetheart." Isabel's thumb swiped across her phone screen. "Can you not call me that at school? People hear things." People hear a father loving his daughter. The horror. She finally glanced up, and for a second Nate saw Grace looking back at him. Same green eyes, same stubborn set to her jaw. "Dad, please. Sarah Jennings already thinks you're weird because you fired another secretary." The words landed harder than the morning's punches. Nate's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Emma had been secretary number 7 this year. Sweet kid just out of college had quit after 2 months when Nate's jokes about her weekend plans had crossed some invisible line he hadn't even known existed. "I didn't fire her. She resigned." "Because you made her uncomfortable." Isabel's voice carried the weight of someone who'd had this conversation before. "Mom wouldn't have let you get away with this." The car stopped at the curb. Students poured through the school's entrance, a river of backpacks and adolescent drama. Isabel reached for the door handle, then paused. "Dr. Morrison called," she said quietly. "Your therapist. You missed 3 appointments." "I've been busy." "You're always busy." She pushed the door open. "Mom used to say you hid behind work when things got hard. Guess she was right." The door slammed. Nate watched his daughter disappear into the crowd, and the ghost in the passenger seat. Grace's memory whispered the same accusation Isabel had just voiced. His phone buzzed. Garrett Sullivan's name lit up the screen. "Board meeting moved up to 9. Garrett's voice crackled through the speaker. "And Nate, we need to talk about the HR complaints. How many this time?" "3, this month alone." A pause. "Lily from reception, Jennifer in accounting, and the new girl in marketing whose name you probably don't remember because you only talk to her chest." Nate's jaw clenched. "That's not fair, true, both probably." Garrett had been his friend since their Navy days, which meant he'd earned the right to deliver hard truths. But perception is reality in corporate America, and the perception is that Nathaniel Blackwood thinks his billion-dollar net worth comes with certain privileges. The line went dead. Nate sat in his car for another minute watching Seattle's morning rush turn the streets into arteries of controlled chaos. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like his old platoon leader asked when he'd become the kind of man who needed warning about his own behavior. He didn't have an answer. Blackwood Technologies occupied floors 30 through 45 of the Columbia Tower, a glass and steel monument to what happened when you turned government cybersecurity contracts into private sector gold. Nate had built this empire from the scraps of his father's failing company, pouring everything he'd learned in the teams into creating encryption software that made the Pentagon look like amateurs. The executive suite greeted him with the usual reverence assistance, straightening when he passed junior executives angling for eye contact, the kind of deference money bought whether you deserved it or not. The new receptionist Lily looked up from her desk as he approached. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood." Her smile was professional practiced. 23, blonde, exactly the kind of wholesome all-American look that would have made Nate's mother approve. He stopped. Let his eyes travel over her dress, cream-colored modest by most standards, but the way it hugged her waist deserved acknowledgement. "That dress suits you, Lily. Brings out your eyes." Color rose in her cheeks. "Thank you, sir." "New, the dress, I mean." Yes. Nordstrom had a sale." "Well, they should hire you as a model." Nate flashed the smile that had closed deals and opened doors. "Make their whole catalog look that good." He walked away before she could respond, missing the way her smile faltered, the quick glance she exchanged with another assistant, whose expression said, "This is what everyone warned you about." The corner office offered a view of Elliott Bay waters stretching toward the Olympics in the distance. Nate's assistant, his 8th this year, he realized with uncomfortable clarity, had coffee waiting. Black, no sugar. Grace's photo sat on his desk in a silver frame frozen in that moment at their wedding when she'd looked at him like he was capable of being the man she believed in. "You made me better," he whispered to the photograph. His computer chimed. Email from an anonymous sender, no subject line. Nate almost deleted it, probably spam, but something made him click. "Your father's company is built on lies. Ask him about Project Serpent before the dementia takes what's left." The message had no signature, no follow-up information. Nate stared at the screen until the words blurred. Harrison Blackwood lived in a memory care facility on the east side, now Alzheimer's eating away at the brilliant mind that had launched Blackwood Technologies in 1985. Most days he thought Nate was still in high school. Some days he didn't recognize his son at all. Project Serpent. The name meant nothing. Nate deleted the email and tried to forget the unease it had planted in his chest. The morning dissolved into meetings, budget reviews, contract negotiations, the endless machinery of running a company that employed 3,000 people across 12 states. By 9, Nate sat in the executive conference room with his senior team listening to the CFO explain why third-quarter revenue projections looked soft. His new secretary sat to his right taking notes. They'd hired her Friday Vivian, something he'd have to check the file, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet competence that suggested she wouldn't last long once she figured out what working for him actually entailed. Nate leaned closer to point at something on her laptop screen. His shoulder brushed hers. She stiffened but didn't pull away. "Those figures," he said, keeping his voice low enough that only she'd hear. "The ones Matthews is citing. They're wrong. We closed the Raytheon contract last week, but he's using pre-signature numbers." Viv's eyes flicked to him, then back to the screen. "Should I correct him?" "No, let him finish. Then you correct him." Nate let his hand rest on the back of her chair. Show everyone why I hired you." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she nodded. When Matthews wrapped up his presentation, Viv raised one hand. "Excuse me, I think there might be an error in slide 7. The room's attention shifted. Matthews frowned. "I triple-checked those numbers personally." "Yes, sir. But the Raytheon contract closed Thursday at 4:15 p.m. Your projections are using Wednesday's figures, which underestimate Q3 revenue by approximately $18 million. Silence. Matthews pulled up his source documents, and Nate watched the man's face cycle through doubt verification and grudging acceptance. "She's right. I'll update the presentation." Garrett caught Nate's eye from across the table, one eyebrow raised in a look that said, "Don't screw this one up like the others." The meeting ended at noon. Nate stood stretching muscles that had gone tight from sitting. "Vivian, walk with me." She gathered her materials with methodical precision. Laptop closed, pen returned to its holder, notepad aligned with the table's edge. Everything about her movements suggested someone who believed in order and rules in lines that shouldn't be crossed. They walked toward the executive dining room. Nate kept his hands in his pockets this time, aware of Garrett's warning of the HR complaints, of the growing sense that maybe everyone else saw something he'd been willfully blind to. "You did well in there," he said. "Not many people would challenge Matthews. He's been CFO since before you were born." "I wasn't challenging him. I was correcting an error." Viv's voice carried no warmth. "That's my job. Your job is to make me look good," which you did. "So thank you." They reached the dining room entrance. "Have lunch with me. We should talk about—" "I brought lunch from home, Mr. Blackwood." She met his eyes directly. "But thank you for the offer." Something in her gaze made Nate pause. Most people looked at him with some combination of admiration, fear, or calculation. Viv looked at him like he was a problem to be solved, a puzzle with missing pieces she didn't quite trust. "Suit yourself." He smiled anyway. "But call me Nate. Mr. Blackwood makes me feel ancient." "You're my employer, sir. Professional boundaries exist for a reason." She walked away before he could respond, her heels clicking that same decisive rhythm he'd remember 72 hours later in the boardroom. Nate stood in the hallway watching her go and felt something shift. Not attraction exactly, though she was striking in that sharp-featured way that suggested intelligence over conventional beauty. No, this was something else. Challenge, resistance, interest. The afternoon crawled. Nate reviewed contracts, signed off on 3 new hires, and ignored 2 more emails from Dr. Morrison about rescheduling. By 3 o'clock his eyes ached from staring at screens, and his mind kept drifting back to Viv's expression in the hallway, that flat assessing look that said she'd already taken his measure and found him wanting. He buzzed her desk. "Vivian, need you in my office." She appeared 2 minutes later, notepad ready. Nate gestured to the chair across from his desk, but she remained standing. "I'm reviewing the Hutchinson file," he said, pulling up documents on his monitor. "Come look at this clause. I think legal missed something." Viv circled the desk, stood beside him close enough that he caught the scent of her shampoo. Something clean and uncomplicated. No expensive perfume trying to announce itself. She leaned in to read the screen, and Nate was suddenly acutely aware of the proximity, the way her presence created its own gravity field. His hand moved to her lower back, just resting there, casual, supportive. She went rigid. "Mr. Blackwood," her voice had gone flat, "please don't touch me." Nate pulled his hand back like he'd touched a hot stove. I know what you were doing." Viv stepped away, putting the desk between them. "And I'm asking you to stop." Heat rose in his face, part embarrassment, part indignation. "I think you're overreacting. I was being friendly." "Friendly is a handshake. Friendly is good morning. Friendly is not putting your hand on my back without permission." She gathered her notepad. "If there's nothing else work-related, I have emails to answer." "Wait." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. "I don't appreciate being made to feel like some kind of predator in my own office." "Then don't act like one." The silence that followed felt like falling. Nate stared at this woman who'd been his employee for exactly 4 days, and had just called him out with the kind of blunt honesty no one else in this building would dare. Part of him wanted to fire her on the spot. Part of him, the part that sounded like Grace, like Isabel, like the man he used to be before grief had worn down his edges, knew she was right. "You can go," he said quietly. Viv left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like punctuation. Nate sat alone in his office staring at Grace's photograph and wondered when he'd become someone who needed to be told, "Don't touch me." 6 o'clock came and went. The office emptied, associates heading home to families, junior executives to happy hours, the cleaning crew filtering in to erase the day's evidence. Nate stayed reviewing acquisition targets for a company he wasn't sure he wanted to buy, filling time, because going home meant sitting in that empty house with only Isabel's disappointment for company. Movement in his peripheral vision. Viv at her desk in the outer office packing her bag. Nate stood, walked to his doorway. "Vivian?" She looked up and he saw wariness in her expression. Not fear, she didn't seem capable of that, but caution, the look you'd give a dog that had already bitten once. "I wanted to apologize," he started, "for earlier. You were right, I crossed a line. Thank you for acknowledging that. And I wanted to invite you to dinner, to make amends." He leaned against the doorframe, trying for casual. "There's a great Italian place in Pioneer Square. My treat." "No." The word landed flat and final. Nate blinked. "No. I don't have dinner with my boss. It blurs professional boundaries which you've already demonstrated a problem respecting." Viv zipped her bag. "Was there anything else?" "You're very direct. You're very persistent." She stood, meeting his eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, I need this job. The salary is good and I have bills to pay. But I won't compromise myself to keep it. So if you're planning to fire me for not sleeping with you, just do it now and save us both the time." Nate's breath caught. That's not what I..." "Then what are you doing?" "Because from where I'm standing, this looks exactly like what 7 other women experienced before they quit." Viv's voice remained level, but her hands had curled into fists at her sides. "I came here to work. Just to work. If you can't respect that, tell me now." The accusation hung between them. Nate wanted to argue, to explain that she'd misunderstood, that he wasn't that kind of man. But the evidence said otherwise. 7 secretaries in a year, 3 HR complaints this month, a daughter who couldn't look him in the eye. "I can respect it," he heard himself say. "Good." Viv shouldered her bag. "Then I'll see you tomorrow morning, 8 sharp." She walked past him, and Nate's hand shot out, not grabbing, just touching her arm to stop her. "Wait, please." Viv looked down at his hand, then up at his face. Something in her expression shifted, hardened into a line that had been approached one too many times. "I said don't touch me. I just wanted to..." Her hand moved faster than he'd expected. The slap caught him full across the face, sharp and clean, and utterly without hesitation. The sound echoed in the empty office like a gunshot. Nate staggered back, hand flying to his cheek. The sting radiated through his jaw, but the shock hit harder. No one had struck him since his last deployment, since hand-to-hand drills with men who knew how to kill and had the scars to prove it. Vivian stood there, chest heaving, her own hand trembling. "Touch me again," she said, voice shaking now but still steady at its core. "And I'll sue. I came here to work, not be your conquest number 8. She turned and walked out. Her heels clicked across the marble floor, each step a countdown. The elevator dinged. The doors closed. Nate stood alone in his office, hand still pressed to his burning cheek, and for the first time in 3 years felt something other than numb. Garrett found him 20 minutes later, still standing in the same spot, staring at nothing. "Jesus, Nate, what happened to your face?" Nate's laugh came out bitter. "I got slapped." "By who?" "The new secretary, Vivian." Garrett's expression cycled through surprise, disbelief, and something that looked uncomfortably like satisfaction. "You got slapped finally. Finally someone stood up to you. She assaulted me. I could press charges." "For what?" "Defending herself." Garrett dropped into one of the visitor chairs, studying Nate with the same analytical gaze he'd used to read enemy positions during their deployment. What did you do? Nothing, I just touched her arm. After she told you not to touch her. The words died in Nate's throat. He sank into his own chair, the leather groaning. His reflection stared back from the darkened windows, 47 years old, successful by every metric that mattered to the world, and utterly alone because he'd forgotten how to be anything other than entitled. Grace would be ashamed of me, he said quietly. Yeah. Garrett's voice carried no comfort. She would. When did I become this person? After she died. You buried yourself in work, pushed everyone away, and convinced yourself that being powerful meant you could do whatever you wanted. Garrett leaned forward. But here's the thing, brother. That woman who just slapped you, she looked at you the way everyone else should have been looking at you for months, like you were being disgusting. The word hit like a physical blow. Nate's hand found Grace's photograph, fingers tracing the frame's edge. I don't know how to fix this. Start by apologizing, really apologizing, not just saying words you think will smooth things over. Garrett stood. And maybe consider that she did you a favor, woke you up before you completely destroyed everything you've built. He left. Nate sat in the darkness of his office, Seattle's lights painting patterns across the ceiling, and made a decision. The florist opened at 6. Nate was there at 5:50, waiting on the sidewalk with his phone and a purpose that felt like drowning in reverse. The owner, a woman in her 60s who'd arranged flowers for Grace's funeral, unlocked the door and barely blinked when he ordered 100 roses. Red, she asked. No, white, for an apology. She studied him with eyes that had probably seen every variation of male stupidity Seattle had to offer. Must have been some mistake. It was. By 7, he had the roses delivered to Vivian's desk with a note he'd rewritten 6 times until the words felt true. I was wrong. You deserved respect, not harassment. Please stay. I want to change. Note. Then he called Dr. Morrison's office and rescheduled all 3 missed appointments. At 7:30, he sent company-wide email from his personal account. Effective, immediately Blackwood Technologies implements zero-tolerance harassment policy. This applies to everyone, including me. Any employee who feels uncomfortable should contact HR directly. Complaints will be investigated, and violators will face consequences regardless of position. Garrett called before he could second-guess the decision. Did you just publicly admit to being a problem? I publicly admitted to fixing one. That's either the bravest or stupidest thing you've done. Haven't decided which. Nate pulled into the Columbia Tower parking garage at 7:50. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt longer than usual, each floor's ding a reminder that he was about to face someone who'd literally slapped sense into him 12 hours ago. Viv was already at her desk when he emerged. She looked up, saw him, and her hand moved fractionally toward her bag, fight or flight instinct calculating which option made more sense. Good morning, Nate said, keeping his distance, 3 feet, at least enough space to breathe. Mr. Blackwood, her eyes flicked to the roses, then back to his face. No smile, no softening. I wanted to apologize, properly this time, without excuses. He stayed in the doorway to his office, hands visible, posture open. Yesterday I behaved inexcusably. I made you uncomfortable, ignored your boundaries, and acted like my position gave me rights I don't have. I'm sorry. Viv's expression didn't change. Thank you for saying that. I also wanted to make you an offer. A trial period. 90 days. Nate pulled an envelope from his jacket. Work for me, and if I cross any line at all, you walk away with 6 months severance. No questions, no legal battles. You just leave and I write the check. Why would you do that? Because you were right. 7 women quit because I made them uncomfortable. That's not leadership. That's abuse of power. He placed the envelope on the corner of her desk, careful not to get closer. Grace, my late wife, she believed I could be better than my worst impulses. I'd like to prove her right. Viv picked up the envelope, read the contract inside with the same methodical attention she'd given everything since he'd met her. When she looked up, something had shifted in her expression, not trust exactly, but maybe the possibility of it. 90 days, she said. One inappropriate comment, one unwanted touch, and I'm gone. Agreed. And I want it in writing that you'll attend therapy. Real therapy, not just sessions you skip. Nate felt the corners of his mouth twitch. You're negotiating with me. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. Deal. He extended his hand for a formal shake. After a moment's hesitation, Viv took it. Her grip was firm, professional, and ended exactly when it should have. She signed the contract. Nate signed beneath her name, and something settled in his chest. Not redemption, not yet, but the first step toward it. Thank you for giving me a second chance, he said. Don't make me regret it. The rest of the day passed in careful navigation. Nate caught himself twice about to make comments about Viv's appearance and swallowed them. He maintained professional distance during meetings, kept conversations work-focused, and felt like a teenager learning basic social skills for the first time. At lunch, he ate alone in his office and called the 7 former secretaries. 3 answered. 2 hung up when they heard his voice. 1, Emma, the most recent, listened to his apology and said she'd think about accepting it. You really hurt me, she said quietly. Made me feel like I was only valuable for how I looked. I know. I'm sorry. Are you actually changing, or is this just damage control? Nate looked at Viv through his office window, watching her handle 3 phone calls simultaneously while taking notes with the precision of someone who'd never once needed a man to validate her competence. I'm trying to change, he said. Can't promise I'll succeed, but I'm trying. Emma hung up without responding. By 6, when Viv packed her bag to leave, Nate called out from his desk. Have a good evening, she paused. You too, Mr. Blackwood. Nate, he said. You can call me Nate if you want. I'm comfortable with Mr. Blackwood. Professional boundaries. Exactly. She left, and Nate worked until midnight going through old HR complaints he'd dismissed, reading accounts of behavior he barely remembered but couldn't deny. Each report felt like another slap, another wake-up call he'd ignored because it was easier than admitting fault. His phone buzzed. Isabel texting from home. Sarah Jennings says you actually apologized to people. Is that true? Nate typed back, trying to be better, like Mom wanted. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, good. She'd be proud. He stared at those words until the screen went dark, then pulled up his computer and opened the file he'd been avoiding all day. The anonymous email about Project Serpent. His father's name attached to something sinister enough that a stranger felt compelled to warn him, but the email was gone. Deleted from trash, from archive, from every folder he could access, like it had never existed at all. Nate sat back in his chair, unease crawling up his spine. Somewhere in the building's HVAC system, air circulated with the soft hiss of money and power keeping itself comfortable. Outside, Seattle glowed against the darkness, thousands of people living their lives in blissful ignorance of the machinery that controlled them. His computer chimed. New email, same anonymous sender. You deleted my warning. They're watching. If you want the truth about your father, check his office at the Riverside facility. Room 347. Tonight before they move him. Nate's hands hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed trap. But the mention of room numbers of his father's specific location suggested someone who knew things they shouldn't. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. Riverside Memory Care sat in Bellevue, 40 minutes across Lake Washington if traffic cooperated. Nate made it in 30, pushing the Tesla harder than necessary, his mind running scenarios that all ended badly. The facility's lobby greeted him with soft lighting and furniture designed to soothe families watching their loved ones dissolve. The night nurse recognized him. Mr. Blackwood, visiting hours ended at 8. I know, family emergency. Not technically a lie. Just need to grab something from my father's room. She hesitated, then waved him through. Nate took the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. 3rd floor, left corridor, room 347. The door stood ajar. Nate pushed it open. Harrison Blackwood sat in his wheelchair by the window, staring at nothing the way he did most days now, mind trapped somewhere between 1985 and oblivion. The room smelled of antiseptic and old age. Everything personal stripped away except photographs on the dresser. Harrison with Nate's mother before the cancer took her. Harrison cutting the ribbon at Blackwood Technologies' grand opening. Harrison holding baby Nate with an expression that suggested fatherhood had been an unexpected joy. "Dad," Nate knelt beside the wheelchair. "It's me, Alexander, Nate." Harrison's eyes focused slowly, recognition flickering like a dying bulb. "Alexander, you're supposed to be at Annapolis." "I graduated, Dad, 25 years ago." "Oh." The confusion in his father's voice made Nate's chest ache. "I forget sometimes." "I know." Nate scanned the room looking for whatever the anonymous email had wanted him to find. Dresser drawers yielded nothing but clothes. The closet held a navy dress uniform from Harrison's service, mothballed and forgotten. Behind the photographs, Nate's fingers found something taped to the frame backing. A key, small brass, the kind that opened safety deposit boxes. "Dad, what's this for?" Harrison's hand gripped Nate's wrist with surprising strength. "The money. I'm sorry about the money, Alexander. They made me. They said they'd hurt her." "Hurt who, Mom?" "Grace. They showed me the car, showed me what they'd do. I gave them everything to keep her safe, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough." Ice flooded Nate's veins. "Dad, Grace is dead. She died 3 years ago." "I know." Harrison's eyes cleared for one brief, terrible moment. "Because I couldn't protect her. Just like I couldn't protect you from what's coming. Project Serpent. They're going to destroy you the same way they destroyed me." The old man's head dropped. The moment of clarity passed like a switch flipping, leaving only confusion behind. Nate pocketed the key and pulled out his phone, fingers shaking as he typed, "Who are you? What is Project Serpent?" The response came immediately, not over text. "Tomorrow your secretary will approach you. Trust her. She's the only one who can help you both survive what's coming. Vivian." The woman who'd slapped him, who'd demanded respect, who moved through his office like she was hunting something he couldn't see. Nate looked at his father's vacant expression and felt the ground shift beneath everything he thought he knew. Present day. The boardroom. The memory snapped back to the present. Viv still stood in the boardroom doorway, USB drive held high, every eye in the room fixed on her. Nate's cheek still burned with the phantom sensation of her slap 72 hours ago, but now it felt like something else, like the first honest thing anyone had given him in years. She walked toward the table and Nate saw what he'd missed before: the slight tremor in her hands, the tightness around her eyes that said she was terrified but doing it anyway. She plugged the drive into the conference room's display system. "My name is Vivian Harper," she said. "I'm not just Mr. Blackwood's secretary. I'm an investigative journalist for the Washington Post, and for the past 3 months I've been investigating a corporate conspiracy called Project Serpent." Files filled the screen. Harrison Blackwood's signature on documents dated 2004. Bank transfers. Email chains between executives at companies that supposedly competed but actually colluded. And at the center of it all, a name Nate recognized from his father's mumblings: Montgomery Whitmore. "These men," Viv continued, her voice gaining strength, "have been operating a price-fixing cartel for 20 years. They control 80% of the cybersecurity market through illegal coordination. Harrison Blackwood was blackmailed into joining after they threatened his family, and 3 months ago they framed his son to take control of Blackwood Technologies." The board members' faces cycled through shocked disbelief calculation. Cassandra Winters, the CFO Nate had fired 2 years ago for embezzlement, stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You have no proof." "I have 20 years of proof." Viv's eyes found Nate's across the room, including evidence that Grace Blackwood's car accident was sabotage. They killed her to keep Harrison in line, and when that didn't work, they went after his son. The room tilted. Nate gripped the armrests. Grace's face blooming in his memory, the last time he'd seen her alive, heading out for groceries she'd never bring home. "Why should we believe any of this?" Garrett's voice cut through the chaos, but his eyes were on Nate, asking a different question. "Is this true?" "Because," Viv said quietly, "I'm Vivian Harper. daughter of FBI agent David Harper, who died investigating Project Serpent 10 years ago. They called it suicide. It wasn't. She turned to Nate, and in her eyes he saw the same determination that had made her slap him, the same refusal to be diminished that had kept her coming back to work every day despite his behavior. "I came to your company to destroy your family's legacy," she said. "I thought you were part of the conspiracy, but I was wrong. You're a victim, and I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner." Nate stood on legs that felt like water. 72 hours ago this woman had slapped him. Now she was offering salvation from a nightmare he hadn't known existed. "What do we do?" he asked. Viv's smile was sharp. "We burn it all down. Together." The boardroom erupted. 12 voices collided in accusations and denials, Cassandra's face draining to ash while Garrett crossed the room in 4 strides to grip Nate's shoulder. The USB drive's contents scrolled across the screen, 20 years of evidence, Harrison's signature repeated like a confession he'd never meant to make. Nate's vision tunneled to Viv's face. She stood beneath the display, backlit by data that proved his father had been broken rather than corrupt, and the distance between them felt both infinite and already crossed. The door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, badges, flashing voices commanding everyone to remain seated. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with eyes that had seen every variation of corporate malfeasance Seattle could produce, zeroed in on Cassandra. "Cassandra Winters, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering." Handcuffs clicked. "You have the right to remain silent." Cassandra's composure shattered. She twisted in the agent's grip, face contorting toward Nate. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're different. You're exactly like your father, weak, scared, willing to sacrifice anything to protect what's yours." "I'm nothing like him," Nate heard himself say, but the words tasted like ash. The agents led Cassandra out. The remaining board members scattered like startled birds, phones already pressed to ears, calling lawyers and accountants and anyone who might shield them from the blast radius. Within 5 minutes, only Garrett and Viv remained. Nate's legs gave out. He sank into the nearest chair, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Garrett crouched beside him, voice low and urgent. "Talk to me, brother. You holding together." "My father." The words came out hollow. "He gave us everything and now he's dead. We don't know that was Whitmore yet. He told me at Riverside. Said they'd come for him once he became lucid again." Nate looked up, meeting Garrett's eyes. "I left him there. Knew it was dangerous and I left him anyway." Viv approached slowly, carrying a folder Nate hadn't noticed before, manila worn at the edges, stuffed with papers that looked decades old. She set it on the table between them. "I need to show you something, but first you need to understand why I'm really here." Garrett stood. "I'll give you two some space." "No." Nate's voice came out steadier than he felt. "Whatever she's about to say, you should hear it. You've kept me alive through worse." Viv nodded, opened the folder to reveal a photograph, young man in an FBI jacket, mid-30s, standing beside a girl of maybe 8. The girl's green eyes stared out from the picture with the same intensity Nate had seen when Viv slapped him. "My father, David Harper. He was investigating financial crimes in the Pacific Northwest when he stumbled onto Project Serpent. Found the same evidence I just showed you, maybe more." Her finger traced the photograph's edge. "They found him in his car 3 months later. Single gunshot to the head. King County ruled it suicide." "But it wasn't," Garrett said quietly. "He left me a message. Voice recording hidden in his desk at home, only discovered when my mother sold the house 5 years ago. He said if anything happened to him, it wasn't suicide. He said Project Serpent went deeper than anyone suspected, and the people behind it had connections that reached into justice, into Congress, into places that made investigating them suicide, whether they pulled the trigger or not." Nate studied the photograph. The girl's smile unguarded, and bright years before betrayal taught her to guard every expression. "You came to destroy us because you thought we killed your father." "I came to expose the truth." Viv's jaw tightened. "I've spent 10 years building this case, credential sources, waiting for the right entry point. Your secretary position opened 4 days ago. I falsified my resume, took the job, and started the final phase of an investigation my father began before he died. The admission hung in the air. 4 days. Nate had known her for 4 days, and in that time she'd turned his life inside out, exposed his worst behavior, and somehow become the only person he trusted to tell him the truth. "How long have you known we weren't the enemy?" 2 weeks before I applied. I verified the shell company transfers, traced the blackmail timeline. That's when I realized you weren't part of the conspiracy. You were another victim. Viv closed the folder. Harrison kept your mother alive as long as she lasted by accepting dirty money. Then they let her die when she was no longer useful. Your father spent 20 years in a prison of Whitmore's making. Garrett paced to the window, staring down at Seattle's streets 40 floors below. So where does that leave us? Cassandra's arrested, but she's a foot soldier. Whitmore's the head of the snake. And he knows I have evidence now. Viv pulled out her phone, scrolled through messages. 6 emails in the last 20 minutes. Anonymous accounts, burner numbers. All variations on the same theme: drop the investigation or face consequences. She turned the screen toward them. The latest message showed a photograph of Riverside Memory Care's entrance, Harrison's window circled in red. Below it 4 words: "Old men die easily." Nate was moving before conscious thought kicked in. Garrett caught his arm. "Think. They're baiting you. You go charging in there, you're playing their game. That's my father. Who's already dead if that threat is real, and alive if it's just intimidation. Either way, rushing in doesn't change the outcome." Garrett's grip tightened. "But you're vulnerable, angry, exactly the state they want you in." Nate forced himself to breathe. Navy training kicked in: assess, prioritize, execute. Panic got people killed. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. "Nathaniel." The voice was cultured, East Coast educated, carrying the casual authority of someone who'd never heard the word no and meant it. "We need to talk like adults." "Montgomery Whitmore." Nate's hand clenched around the phone. "Calling to threaten me yourself. Calling to offer you a choice. You've made your point, exposed some unfortunate business practices, generated headlines, embarrassed people who probably deserved it. Now it's time to be practical." Whitmore's tone suggested he was discussing stock portfolios, not murder. "Withdraw your allegations. Take your charming journalist friend and disappear somewhere warm. I'll ensure you have resources to live comfortably for the rest of your life. And if I refuse, then everyone you love dies. Your daughter, your friend Garrett, Ms. Harper, and her entire extended family. I'll make it slow enough that you understand the cost of stubbornness." A pause. "I'm not a monster, Nathaniel. I'm a businessman. Dead bodies are expensive and messy. I'd much prefer we settle this like reasonable men." Viv's face had gone pale. Garrett's hand moved toward the concealed weapon under his jacket. "You killed my father," Nate said quietly. "You killed my wife. You've spent 20 years building an empire on blood and extortion, and you think I'm going to shake hands and walk away. I think you're going to make the same choice Harrison made: survival over principle, because at the end of the day we're all cowards when faced with losing what we actually love." Whitmore's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd tested this theory repeatedly. "You have 12 hours to reconsider. After that I stop being polite." The line went dead. Nate stared at his phone, feeling the walls close in. "We need somewhere secure." Garrett was already moving. "My cabin. North Bend, 40 miles into the Cascades. No cell service, no internet, just satellite phone, and enough weapons to make an assault expensive." Viv shook her head. "I need to stay connected. The story breaks in 6 hours. My editor's already laying out the front page. If I disappear, Whitmore wins by default. If you stay, you die." Nate moved close enough to see the fear she was trying to hide. "He killed my wife to control my father. He will absolutely kill you if it means burying this. Then we make sure dying doesn't bury it." Her chin lifted. "I've already sent copies to 3 colleagues, my lawyer, and a safety deposit box in Portland. If I disappear, the story still runs. He gains nothing by killing me now. Except revenge. I'm not afraid of revenge. I'm afraid of failing to finish what my father started." Garrett interrupted. Hate to break up the standoff, but we're wasting time. Either we all go to the cabin or we split up and hope Whitmore can't cover multiple targets. Your call, Nate." Nate studied Viv's expression, the set of her shoulders, the way her hands had stopped trembling now that the confession was done. She'd spent 10 years hunting him, switched to protecting him in the span of days, and stood here now offering to make herself bait because principles mattered more than survival. "We stick together," he decided. "Garrett, call Juliet. Tell her to file emergency protective orders for Isabel. Get her moved to a secure location. Isabel's at school." "Not anymore. Pull her out. Tell her I'll explain later." Nate turned to Viv. "You send that story to your editor now. Full embargo until tomorrow morning, but if we disappear it runs immediately." She was already typing. "Done. What else?" "We go to the cabin, regroup, figure out how to take down a billionaire who's spent 2 decades building power." Nate grabbed his jacket. "And we do it before he figures out we're coming for him." The parking garage felt like a trap waiting to spring. Nate's Tesla sat in its reserved spot, sleek and expensive and possibly compromised. Garrett circled it twice, checking wheel wells and undercarriage. "Clean," he announced, "but that doesn't mean they're not watching." Viv had changed into jeans and a jacket she'd pulled from a gym bag in her desk, prepared for contingencies in a way that suggested this wasn't her first time running. She moved with economical precision, checking her phone one last time before powering it down. 42 missed calls, 12 from my editor, 23 from unknown numbers, 7 from Seattle area codes I don't recognize. Could be Whitmore's people, could be FBI wanting follow-up, could be journalists smelling blood. Garrett slid behind the wheel of his truck, F-150 mud-splattered and anonymous. "Either way, nothing you can safely answer right now." They split up. Nate took the Tesla with Viv riding passenger while Garrett's truck would follow at a distance to spot tails. Surface streets to I-90, then east into the mountains where cell towers thinned and satellite phones became the only link to civilization. Viv sat rigid in her seat as Nate navigated out of downtown, every muscle tensed like she expected impact. "You can relax. We're not being followed yet." "How do you know?" "Because Garrett would have signaled." Nate gestured to the rear view. "He's been watching my back since Fallujah. If there's a tail, he'll spot it." She didn't relax. Her hand rested on the door handle, ready to bolt. "Your father," Nate said quietly. "The recording he left. What else did it say?" Viv's jaw worked. "That he loved me. That he was sorry. That the men he was investigating had power most people couldn't imagine, and if I ever found the recording I should run as far as I could and never look back." "But you didn't run." "I was 23 when I found it, stupid enough to think I could make a difference." Her laugh carried no humor. "Spent the last 10 years building credentials, making connections, waiting for the right moment to strike." Nate merged onto I-90, the Seattle skyline shrinking behind them. "You lied your way into my company, spent 4 days gathering final evidence, probably would have destroyed me if you'd found what you expected." "Yes. I should fire you, sue you for fraud, industrial espionage, a dozen other charges." "You should." Viv finally looked at him. "Why haven't you?" "Because you slapped me and it woke me up. Because you looked at me like I was broken and worth fixing anyway. Because somewhere between hating what I'd become and saving my life, you became the only person I trust." He said none of that. "Because we're on the same side now, and I need someone who knows how to fight dirty." The mountains rose ahead, ancient and indifferent. Traffic thinned as they climbed suburbs, giving way to forest. Nate's phone buzzed once Garrett signaled that they were still clear, then went silent as towers disappeared. They drove in silence for 10 miles. Then Viv spoke, voice quiet. "Tell me about her. Your wife." The request landed like an ambush. "Why?" "Because they used her against your father, and I need to understand what we're really fighting for." "Fair question." Nate navigated a switchback buying time. He'd spent 3 years not talking about Grace, burying memories under work and bad decisions. "We met at a charity gala. I was 32, fresh out of the teams, trying to figure out civilian life. She was 28, working for a nonprofit that provided legal aid to veterans." The words came easier than expected. She walked up and asked if I was there because I believed in the cause or because my accountant said I needed tax deductions. What did you say? The truth, that my father made me come and I'd rather be anywhere else. Nate smiled at the memory. She told me that was the first honest thing anyone had said to her all night, and if I bought her a drink she'd explain why honesty was overrated in polite company. Viv's expression softened. She sounds remarkable. She made me want to be better. Called me on my bullshit pushed back when I got too comfortable. The ache in his chest felt familiar and foreign at once. After she died, I forgot all of that. Turned into exactly the kind of man she would have hated. Until I slapped you. Until you slapped me, he agreed. They drove in silence for another 10 miles. The cabin emerged from forest like something conjured, rough-hewn logs, stone chimney, solar panels glinting on the roof. Garrett's truck pulled in behind them. "Welcome to the safest place in Washington," Garrett announced. "No neighbors for 5 miles, satellite phone for emergencies, and enough firepower to make an assault very expensive." Nate surveyed the perimeter. Old habits kicked in, sightlines, approach vectors, defensible positions. The cabin sat on high ground with clear views of the access road. "How often do you use this place?" "Weekends, mostly. After deployment ended rough, I figured we'd both need somewhere to disappear eventually." Garrett unlocked the door. Built it for that. Inside the cabin smelled of wood smoke and solitude. Spartan furniture, military-grade communications equipment, a gun safe that probably held enough weaponry to outfit a platoon. Garrett moved to a control panel by the door, flipping switches. "Perimeter sensors active. Tripwires on the access road at 3 points. Anyone approaches, we'll know 15 minutes before they arrive." "You expecting trouble?" "I'm expecting Whitmore's smarter than we want him to be." Garrett fired up the satellite link screens, flickering to life. "I've got access to federal databases through my security clearance. Not technically legal for civilian use, but given the circumstances, I'm willing to bend rules." Nate pulled up a chair. "We need financial records. Shell companies tied to Whitmore board members who took payments, anyone in government who might have run interference." Viv sat across from him, opening her laptop. "I have most of that already. What I don't have is the smoking gun proof Whitmore personally ordered the hits. Without that, he's just a businessman who made questionable deals. His lawyers will spin it 6 ways. Then we find the proof." Garrett's fingers flew across keyboards. "Start with communication records. Emails, texts, anything that shows coordination." They worked in synchronized silence, 3 people hunting a monster through digital breadcrumbs. Nate cross-referenced Harrison's blackmail timeline with corporate filings. Viv tracked money flows, building webs of payments. Garrett pulled security footage, comparing official reports to camera timestamps that didn't match. An hour passed. The perimeter alarm chirped once, deer crossing the access road. They worked through it. Viv broke first, slamming her laptop shut. "We're finding connections, implications, circumstantial evidence. We need something concrete, a confession, a witness, something that can't be explained away." Nate rubbed his eyes. She was right. Everything they'd found was damning but deniable. The satellite phone vibrated. Text from an unknown number. "Your father is awake. He's asking for you. Says he remembers everything." Nate's pulse spiked. "Harrison, he's lucid." Garrett looked up sharply. "That's impossible. His doctor said, maybe it's a trap, maybe it's real." Nate was already moving toward the door. "If he really remembers Project Serpent, he's the witness we need." Viv caught his arm. "It's obviously bait. They want you to leave the cabin, expose yourself. Then I die learning the truth. That's not courage, that's suicide." The perimeter alarm shrieked. All 3 screens flashed red. Garrett was on his feet, pulling weapons from the safe. "3 vehicles, coming fast, 2 miles out and closing." Viv's face went pale. "They found us." "Tripwire should slow them." Garrett tossed Nate a rifle. "But we've got maybe 10 minutes before they're on us. We need to move now." Nate's mind raced through options. Stand and fight, probably get killed. Run, get hunted down. Surrender, definitely get killed. "There's a ravine half a mile north," Garrett said, reading his thoughts. "Dense forest, multiple escape routes. We can disappear, regroup." They'll follow our tracks. Not if we make them think we're still here. Garrett was already setting charges, rigging the cabin's entrance. Flashbangs on a timer. Goes off 3 minutes after we're gone, makes them think we're defending position. Buys us time to vanish. The alarm's pitch changed. 1 mile out. They grabbed essentials, Harrison's folder, laptops, weapons, and ran. Out the back entrance into forest that swallowed them in seconds. Behind them, the cabin sat waiting like a trap about to spring. Nate heard engines kill, doors slam, professional voices coordinating approach. Then the flashbangs detonated. Brilliant, light, concussive sound chaos. They ran deeper into forest. Garrett led, moving with the certainty of someone who'd mapped every inch of this terrain. Half a mile became 3/4, then a full mile. Finally, they stopped in a hollow surrounded by Douglas fir lungs burning. Garrett pulled out binoculars, scanning their back trail. 6 men, ex-military by movement. They're tearing the cabin apart, but they'll figure out we're gone in maybe 5 minutes. Viv was already on her satellite phone. Calling Emily Hutchinson, federal prosecutor, Eastern District. She's been investigating Whitmore for years. The call connected. Emily's voice came through sharp and awake despite the hour. Harper, where are you? Being hunted by Whitmore's people. We have evidence, 20 years of it, but we need protection and we need it now. Where? Cascade foothills north of North Bend. Can you meet us somewhere public, somewhere they can't disappear us without witnesses? A pause. Pike Place Market, main entrance, 2 hours. Emily's voice shifted, professional mask dropping. And Harper, this better not be a waste of my time. The line went dead. Garrett was already plotting routes on a tactical map pulled from his pack. We can't take the truck. They'll be watching roads. We go on foot, circle wide, hit Highway 90 from an unexpected angle. Flag down a civilian vehicle, get a ride into Seattle. That's a 10-mile hike through rough terrain. You got a better plan. Garrett shouldered his pack. Because staying here means dying here. They moved. Through forest that turned hostile in darkness, over terrain that wanted to break ankles and spirits. Nate's lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he kept moving because the alternative was letting Whitmore win. 2 hours later, they emerged on Highway 90, looking like refugees from a disaster. A semi-driver took pity, gave them a ride to the city limits. From there, a taxi to Pike Place. The market at midnight was a different creature than its daylight self-tourist traps, shuttered the famous neon sign casting red light across cobblestones. Emily Hutchinson waited near the entrance, power suit rumpled from late hours, eyes that had prosecuted enough white-collar criminals to recognize guilt from across a room. You look like hell, Blackwood. Feel worse. Nate extended Harrison's folder. Everything you need to prosecute Montgomery Whitmore for racketeering, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and running a corporate cartel for 2 decades. Emily didn't take it. Walk me through this. Why should I believe anything you're offering isn't tainted? Viv stepped forward. Because this is my investigation. 10 years in the making. The evidence came from Harrison Blackwood, who's been gathering it for 15 years. Whitmore blackmailed him into Project Serpent after threatening his family. When Harrison tried to back out, they killed his daughter-in-law. Emily's expression shifted. Grace Blackwood's accident. You're saying it wasn't an accident. There's a memo discussing brake line persuasion, dated 3 days before her crash. Nate's voice came out flat. They murdered my wife to control my father. Then they framed me to take his company. The prosecutor finally took the folder, flipped through pages, her trained eye catching details. Her jaw tightened. This is actionable. RICO predicate acts, wire fraud, conspiracy touching federal contracts. She looked up. But it's incomplete. I need witness testimony to corroborate. Harrison will testify. He's at Riverside right now, lucid for the first time in months. Emily's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her face went carefully blank. Understood. She ended the call. Met Nate's eyes with an expression that carried bad news. That was Bellevue PD. Harrison Blackwood died 20 minutes ago. Apparent heart attack. Staff found him unresponsive. The words hit like physical blows. Nate's vision tunneled, his father gone. Not lost to Alzheimer's gradual erosion, but murdered. Viv's hand found his arm. Nate, they killed him. His voice came out distant. We got close, and they killed him. He chose to give us this evidence knowing the risk. Her grip tightened. Don't let his sacrifice be meaningless. Emily interrupted. I'm sorry for your loss, but this changes everything. Without Harrison's testimony, this evidence becomes hearsay. Defense attorneys will argue it was fabricated by a man with dementia. Then we make Whitmore confess. Viv pulled out her laptop. He's scheduled for a press conference in 6 hours, 8 a.m. at the Fairmont Olympic. Damage Control announced the acquisition position himself as the adult in the room. Emily shook her head. You're not suggesting we confront him publicly. That's suicide. It's theater, and theater creates opportunity. Viv's fingers flew. We force him to respond to allegations on camera. He either admits culpability or lies so badly it sparks investigation. Or he has you killed in front of witnesses. Emily crossed her arms. I can't sanction that. Nate found his voice pushing past grief into cold calculation. What if we wire ourselves, record the confrontation, get him to incriminate himself? Legally gray, but potentially viable, Emily considered. I'd need the recording to be clean, no entrapment. He has to volunteer information freely. He won't. He's too smart, Garrett paced. Unless we offer him something he wants more than safety. Viv's eyes lit with dangerous recognition. We offer him the evidence. Tell him we'll bury it in exchange for letting us walk away. Make him think he's won. And when he gloats, when he explains exactly how he's untouchable, we record every word. Nate felt the plan crystallizing. Then we turn it over to Emily, who files charges before he can disappear us. Emily pulled out her phone. I'll need to clear this with my supervisor, get authorization for protective custody, and I'll need backup agents positioned to extract you if things go sideways. How long? Give me 3 hours. I can have a team in place by 5 a.m. She looked between them. But understand, if this fails, if Whitmore walks, I can't protect you. You'll be fugitives who tried to blackmail one of Seattle's most prominent businessmen. We're already fugitives. Nate extended his hand. At least this way we're fugitives with purpose. Emily shook it. 5 a.m. Back entrance of the Fairmont. Don't be late, and don't do anything heroically stupid before then. She disappeared into shadows. They found an all-night diner strategizing over food none of them had appetite for. We need leverage beyond the recording. Garrett pushed eggs around his plate. Something that makes Whitmore believe we're genuinely offering a trade. The safety deposit box key. Nate pulled it from his pocket, the brass key Harrison had hidden. We tell Whitmore that's where the original evidence lives and we're willing to turn it over. Viv frowned. Where is the box? No idea. Harrison didn't specify. Nate examined the key. Numbers stamped on one side, 547, but no bank logo. Could be anywhere. Hundreds of banks with safety deposit services. Or it's misdirection. Either way, the threat of it gives us negotiating position. Garrett sipped cold coffee. Viv's laptop chimed. She pulled up an email, face going pale. My editor. The story's been killed. Nate leaned over to read. The message was terse. Due to concerns about source verification and potential legal exposure, the Project Serpent investigation is suspended pending further review. Whitmore got to them. Viv's hands trembled. Called in favors, threatened lawsuits. We just lost our biggest weapon. Nate's phone buzzed. Unknown number. You have 2 choices. Disappear tonight and live. Stay and watch everyone you love die. This is your only warning. M.W. He showed it to them. Watched their expressions cycle through fear, anger, resignation. He's trying to break us before the confrontation. Garrett's jaw set. Classic intimidation. It's working. Viv's voice came out small. How many more people have to get hurt before we admit we're outmatched? Nate thought about the slap, how it had felt necessary, a wake-up call delivered with the force of someone who refused to let him hide. You asked me once why I didn't fire you for breaking into my company. He met her eyes. It's because you reminded me that some things are worth fighting for, even when fighting means losing everything. Your father believed that. And I think you still believe it too. Believing doesn't stop bullets. No, but it gives them meaning when they come. Nate reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. I'm not forcing you into this, but I'm seeing this through. For everyone, Whitmore's crushed because he could. Viv stared at his almost touching hand. Then she closed the distance, fingers lacing with his. I'm not running. My father didn't raise a coward. Garrett cleared his throat. Touching moment aside, we still need a plan. Emily's team won't move until they have probable cause. We need Whitmore to confess on recording. The media. That's our access. Nate's idea formed. Journalists will be there. What if one of those journalists is you, Viv? You ask the question that forces him to respond. I'm a known hostile. His security will never let me in. Not as yourself, as someone else. Garrett was already pulling up websites. I know a guy who does press credentials, theater-quality fakes. We get you badged as a correspondent for a small outlet Whitmore's team won't recognize. The plan had too many variables, too many points of failure. But the alternative was running. 5 a.m., Nate said. We meet Emily, get wired up coordinate positions. You ask your question at 8:15. I approach while security's focused on removing you. And if he doesn't take the bait? Then we tried. And Emily has enough to start an investigation. Nate stood. But I don't think he'll resist. Men like Whitmore can't help but explain exactly how they won. Pike Place Market at midnight was a different creature than its daylight self. Tourist traps, shuttered fishmongers' stalls, empty, the famous neon sign casting red light across cobblestones still slick from evening rain. Nate, Viv, and Garrett emerged from the truck into air that smelled of brine and old coffee, scanning the entrance for Emily Hutchinson and finding only shadows. Viv's phone buzzed. She's running late. Traffic on I-5. Or she's setting us up. Garrett positioned himself against a wall with clear sightlines to 3 approach vectors. Federal prosecutors don't typically drop everything for midnight meetings with fugitives. Nate clutched Harrison's folder, the evidence inside feeling both weightless and crushing. 20 years of his father's cowardice documented in meticulous detail. Every transaction, every compromised decision, every moment Harrison had chosen survival over principle. The pages felt like confession and condemnation wrapped in manila. A figure emerged from the darkness, woman in her early 50s power suit, rumpled from late hours, eyes that had prosecuted enough white-collar criminals to recognize guilt from across a room. Emily Hutchinson moved with the confidence of someone backed by federal authority and personal vendetta. You look like hell, Blackwood. Feel worse. Nate extended the folder. Everything you need to prosecute Montgomery Whitmore for racketeering, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and running a corporate cartel for 2 decades. Emily didn't take it. Walk me through this. Why should I believe anything you're offering isn't tainted by your own legal problems? Viv stepped forward. Because I'm Vivian Harper, Washington Post investigative team, and this is my story. The evidence came from Harrison Blackwood, who's been gathering it for 15 years while pretending to have Alzheimer's. Nate's father was blackmailed into Project Serpent after Whitmore threatened his family. When Harrison tried to back out, they killed his daughter-in-law to reinforce compliance. Emily's expression shifted fractionally. Grace Blackwood's accident. You're saying it wasn't an accident. Memo in here discusses brake line persuasion. Dated 3 days before her crash. Nate's voice came out flat. They murdered my wife to control my father. Then they framed me to take control of his company. We're not the criminals here, Emily. We're the evidence. The prosecutor finally took the folder. Flipped through pages, her trained eye catching details that would mean nothing to civilians, but spoke volumes to someone who'd built cases from financial breadcrumbs. Her jaw tightened with each page turn. This is actionable. RICO, predicate acts, wire fraud across state lines, conspiracy that touches federal contracts. She looked up. But it's also incomplete. I need witness testimony to corroborate chain of custody documentation, proof these records haven't been fabricated. Harrison will testify. He's at Riverside right now, lucid for the first time in months. Emily's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her face went carefully blank. Understood. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She ended the call, met Nate's eyes with an expression that carried bad news like a loaded weapon. "That was Bellevue PD. Harrison Blackwood died 15 minutes ago. Apparent heart attack. Staff found him in his room unresponsive." The words hit like physical blows. Nate's vision tunneled. His father, the man who'd taught him to swim in Puget Sound, who'd celebrated his graduation from Annapolis, who'd held Grace's hand at their wedding and whispered, "You're marrying up, don't screw it up," was gone. Not lost to Alzheimer's gradual erosion, but murdered by the same people who'd controlled him for 2 decades. Viv's hand found his arm. "Nate, they killed him." His voice came out distant. "We left him there, and they killed him. He chose to stay. He knew the risk." Her grip tightened. "Don't let his sacrifice be meaningless." Emily interrupted, professional mask back in place. "I'm sorry for your loss, but this changes everything. Without Harrison's testimony, your father's evidence becomes hearsay. Any competent defense attorney will argue it was fabricated by a man with dementia planted by you to deflect from your own crimes. Then we find another witness, someone else who can corroborate." Garrett's tactical mind was already working angles. Project Serpent involved dozens of executives. Someone else must have kept records. Or we make Whitmore confess. Viv pulled out her laptop. "I've been monitoring his communications. He's scheduled to give a press conference in 6 hours, 8 a.m. at the Fairmont Olympic. Damage Control announced Blackwood Technologies' acquisition position himself as the adult in the room while Nate self-destructs." Emily shook her head. "You're not suggesting we confront him publicly. That's suicide." "It's theater, and theater creates opportunity." Viv's fingers flew across keys. "We show up with media present, force him to respond to allegations on camera. He either admits culpability or lies so badly that it sparks deeper investigation. Or he has you killed in front of witnesses and spins it as justified self-defense." Emily crossed her arms. "I can't sanction that. As a federal prosecutor, I'm obligated to prevent you from doing something catastrophically stupid." Nate found his voice again, pushing past grief into the cold calculation that had kept him alive through 2 deployments. "What if we wire ourselves, record the confrontation, get him to incriminate himself? Washington's a 2-party consent state, but if we're in public, we have reasonable expectation that conversation isn't private." "Legally gray, but potentially viable," Emily considered. "I'd need the recording to be clean. No entrapment, no coercion. He has to volunteer information freely." "He won't. He's too smart." Garrett paced, thinking. "Unless we offer him something he wants more than safety. Something worth risking exposure." Viv's eyes lit with dangerous recognition. "We offer him the evidence. Tell him we'll bury it in exchange for letting us walk away. Make him think he's won. And when he gloats, when he explains exactly how he's untouchable, we record every word." Nate felt the plan crystallizing. "Then we turn the recording over to Emily, who files charges before he can disappear the evidence or us." Emily pulled out her own phone, typing rapidly. "I'll need to clear this with my supervisor, get authorization for protective custody once you make the recording, and I'll need backup agents positioned to extract you if things go sideways." "How long?" "Give me 3 hours. I can have a team in place by 5 a.m. She looked between them. "But understand, if this fails, if Whitmore walks, I can't protect you from the consequences. You'll be fugitives who tried to blackmail one of Seattle's most prominent businessmen. That's a cell, not a medal." "We're already fugitives." Nate extended his hand. "At least this way we're fugitives with purpose." Emily shook it. Her grip was firm, the handshake of someone who'd made this kind of devil's bargain before and survived. 5 a.m. back entrance of the Fairmont. Don't be late and don't do anything heroically stupid before then. She disappeared into the market's shadows, leaving them alone with a plan that felt equal parts brilliant and suicidal. They found a 24-hour diner off Aurora, the kind of place that served coffee strong enough to strip paint and asked no questions about customers who looked like they'd been through wars. Nate, Viv, and Garrett occupied a corner booth, strategizing over food none of them had appetite for. "We need leverage beyond the recording." Garrett pushed eggs around his plate. "Something that makes Whitmore believe we're genuinely offering a trade." "The safety deposit box key." Nate pulled it from his pocket, the brass key Harrison had hidden behind photographs. My father gave me this at Riverside, said it held everything. We tell Whitmore that's where the original evidence lives and we're willing to turn it over. Viv frowned. Where is the box? What bank? No idea. Harrison didn't specify. Nate turned the key over, looking for markings. Numbers stamped on one side, 547, but no bank logo, no identifying information. Could be anywhere in the Seattle area, hundreds of banks with safety deposit services. Or it's misdirection, a decoy to make Whitmore think there's more evidence than we actually have. Garrett sipped coffee that had gone cold. Either way, the threat of it gives us negotiating position. Viv's laptop chimed. She pulled up an email, face going pale. My editor, the story's been killed. Nate leaned over to read. The message was terse, corporate, final. Due to concerns about source verification and potential legal exposure, the Project Serpent investigation is suspended pending further review. All related materials are embargoed until legal clearance is obtained. Whitmore got to them. Viv's hands trembled on the keyboard. Called in favors, threatened lawsuits, whatever it took to spike the story. Can you go to another outlet, New York Times, Wall Street Journal? Someone Whitmore can't influence. Not without burning my career and reputation. If the Post won't run it, other papers will assume the evidence is compromised. She closed the laptop with more force than necessary. We just lost our biggest weapon. The diner felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with the weight of vanishing options. Nate's phone buzzed, unknown number text message appearing character by character like a countdown. You have two choices. Disappear tonight and live. Stay and watch everyone you love die. This is the only warning you'll receive. M.W. He showed it to Garrett and Viv. Watched their expressions cycle through fear, anger, resignation. He's trying to break us before the confrontation, make us doubt, make us run. Garrett's jaw set. Classic intimidation tactic. It's working. Viv's voice came out small. My father disappeared for standing against men like Whitmore. Grace died for it. Harrison died for it. How many more people have to get hurt before we admit we're outmatched? Nate thought about the slap, how it had felt both shocking and necessary, a wake-up call delivered with the force of someone who refused to let him hide behind his worst self. Viv had stood in his office shaking with anger and fear and chosen principle over safety. You asked me once why I didn't fire you for breaking into my company. He met her eyes across the table. It's because you reminded me that some things are worth fighting for, even when fighting means losing everything. Grace believed that. Your father believed that. And I think somewhere under all this fear, you still believe it too. Believing doesn't stop bullets. No, but it gives them meaning when they come. Nate reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. I'm not going to force you into this. If you want to walk away, take Emily's protective custody, testify from safety, I'll understand. But I'm seeing this through. For Grace, for Harrison, for every person Whitmore's crushed because he could. Viv stared at his almost touching hand. Then she closed the distance, her fingers lacing with his, and the gesture felt like a promise neither of them could afford to break. I'm not running. I've spent 10 years preparing for this. My father didn't raise a coward. Garrett cleared his throat. Touching moment aside, we still need a plan that doesn't end with all of us dead. Emily's team won't move until they have probable cause. We need Whitmore to confess on recording, which means we need to make him feel safe enough to gloat. He'll have security, personal detail, probably ex-military. We can't just walk up and start recording. Viv pulled her hand back, the brief moment of connection replaced by tactical necessity. We need access distraction, something that gets us close without triggering his defensive protocols. Nate thought about the press conference, the carefully staged theater Whitmore would orchestrate. Cameras, journalists, controlled narrative designed to paint himself as Seattle's white knight, rescuing a troubled company from its disgraced founder. The media. That's our access point. An idea formed, dangerous and precise. Whitmore's giving a press conference. Journalists will be there asking questions. What if one of those journalists is you, Viv? What if you ask the question that forces him to respond publicly? I'm a known hostile. His security will never let me in. Not as yourself, as someone else. Garrett was already pulling up websites on his phone. I know a guy who does press credentials, theater-quality fakes that'll pass casual inspection. We get you badged as a correspondent for a small outlet someone Whitmore's team won't recognize. Viv considered. That gets me in the room. But it doesn't get us the recording we need. Public confrontation means he'll just deny everything, have security remove me, and spin it as a disgruntled ex-employee making unfounded allegations. Unless we split focus. Nate's mind raced through the tactical problem. You ask the public question, draw his attention. While his security is focused on removing you, I approach from a different angle. Get close enough to trigger a private conversation, one where he thinks he's won. That's insane. You'll be the most wanted man in the room. His security will spot you immediately. Not if I don't look like me. Garrett was grinning now, the expression of someone who'd run extractions in hostile territory and survived on improvisation. Suit, glasses, different posture. Whitmore's seen your picture, but he's never seen you in person. We make you look like a lawyer, a junior executive, someone who belongs in that room without standing out. The plan had too many variables, too many points of failure. But the alternative was running, and Nate had spent 3 years running from grief. He was done. 5 a.m. We meet Emily, get wired up, coordinate backup positions. He looked at Viv. You ask your question at exactly 8:15. That gives me time to position myself, wait for security to react, then approach, while Whitmore's focused on damage control. And if he doesn't take the bait, if he just has us arrested on sight, then we tried. And Emily has enough evidence to start an investigation even without a confession. Nate stood, leaving cash on the table. But I don't think he'll resist. Whitmore's spent 20 years being untouchable. Men like that can't help but explain exactly how they won. They left the diner as the sky began its grudging shift toward dawn. Seattle emerged from darkness in degrees, streetlights flickering off early commuters beginning their migration, the city waking to another day of commerce and compromise. Garrett drove them to his apartment, a sparse third-floor unit in Capitol Hill that looked more like a safe house than a home. He pulled disguise materials from a closet that suggested he'd been preparing for exactly this kind of scenario. Wigs, glasses, theater, makeup, clothes in multiple sizes and styles. Nate transformed in the bathroom mirror. Salt and pepper wig to age him 10 years, glasses with clear lenses, a slight hunch to his posture that changed his silhouette. The man staring back looked like a mid-level executive, forgettable and beneath notice. Viv emerged from the bedroom in a conservative pantsuit, hair pulled back, press badge hanging from a lanyard, identifying her as Karen Phillips, correspondent for a Portland business journal that actually existed but was small enough to escape Whitmore's immediate attention. I look like someone's disappointed aunt. You look like someone who won't get shot on sight. I call that a win. Garrett handed them both wire kits, miniature microphones, and transmitters that would broadcast everything to Emily's team. These are military grade, battery life of 6 hours, range of half a mile. Keep your phone on silent, but recording as backup. The technology felt simultaneously reassuring and damning. Once they walked into that hotel, there would be no anonymity, no deniability. Every word would be captured, analyzed, weaponized. Nate's phone buzzed. Emily, team in position. Back entrance 5 minutes. Do not be late. They piled into Garrett's truck one last time. The drive to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel took 12 minutes through streets that held the city's pre-dawn quiet, that suspended moment before chaos resumed. Nate used the time to steady his breathing, to push past the grief still raw from Harrison's death, to channel everything into the cold focus that had kept him alive when bullets were flying. The hotel's service entrance opened onto a kitchen already alive with breakfast prep. Emily waited with 4 federal agents, all wearing civilian clothes, but carrying themselves with the unmistakable posture of law enforcement. She looked them over with an appraising eye. Disguises are adequate. Wire check. They submitted to technical inspection agents verifying signal strength testing, audio clarity. One of the agents, a woman in her 30s with the precise movements of someone who'd done this 100 times, walked Viv through questioning techniques. You want him reactive but not violent. Ask specific enough to trigger defensiveness broad enough that he can't dismiss it as rumor. And for God's sake, if he pulls a weapon or signals security to use force, you hit the floor and let us handle extraction." Viv nodded, face pale but determined. Nate caught her eye across the room and saw his own fear reflected there, not of dying, but of failing. Of letting all the people who'd already died have died for nothing. Emily pulled Nate aside. "Once you're in that room, we can't help you until we have probable cause to intervene. That means you need to get Whitmore to admit to criminal activity clearly enough that my team can justify arrest. Vague implications won't cut it." "Understood." "And Blackwood, your father's evidence is good, but it's not ironclad. We need this confession." Her eyes held the weight of cases lost to technicalities, to defense attorneys who turned guilt into reasonable doubt. "Don't die before you get it." 6:30 a.m. The hotel's grand ballroom filled with journalists setting up cameras, adjusting lighting, claiming optimal positions for the press conference. Viv entered through the main entrance press badge, getting her past security without a second glance. Nate waited 30 minutes, then followed through a side door, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who belonged. Whitmore's security team was visible but not obtrusive. 6 men in suits positioned at strategic points, eyes constantly scanning. Professional work, the kind of protection that cost serious money and came with ND as thick enough to choke on. Montgomery Whitmore himself held court near the podium, shaking hands with early arrivals, projecting the easy confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for his actions. 55 years old, silver hair, perfectly styled smile that had probably charmed judges and corrupted politicians. He looked like success, like power, like every man who'd ever believed the rules applied to other people. Nate positioned himself 3 rows back, surrounded by journalists and analysts who provided cover. His wire-transmitted background noise conversations about stock prices, speculation about the acquisition, the ambient hum of capitalism preparing to celebrate itself. 7:45. More attendees filtered in. Whitmore's team distributed press packets outlining the acquisition terms, projecting confidence that the deal was done. Viv sat in the front row, notepad ready, playing the role of eager correspondent, hunting her big break. 8 a.m. Whitmore approached the podium. The room settled into attentive silence. "Good morning. I want to address the recent turmoil at Blackwood Technologies directly." His voice carried practiced warmth. "Nathaniel Blackwood is a troubled man who's made serious errors in judgment. Rather than let a storied Seattle company collapse under the weight of his failures, I'm pleased to announce that Whitmore Corporation will be acquiring Blackwood Technologies assets, preserving jobs, and ensuring continuity for clients and partners." Polite applause. Cameras flashed. The theater played exactly as scripted. "I'm happy to take questions." Hands shot up. Whitmore pointed to a reporter from the Seattle Times who lobbed a softball about transition timelines. 2 more friendly questions followed, allowing Whitmore to position himself as the responsible adult, saving a company from its founder's incompetence. Then Viv raised her hand. Whitmore's eyes passed over her, ready to move on, but she spoke anyway. "Karen Phillips, Portland Business Journal. Mr. Whitmore, can you comment on allegations that you participated in a 20-year price-fixing conspiracy called Project Serpent, and that you orchestrated the murder of Grace Blackwood to maintain control over Harrison Blackwood?" The room went silent. Every camera swung toward Whitmore, whose smile froze in place like ice cracking. His security team moved toward Viv, but Whitmore raised one hand, stopping them. "That's an outrageous accusation with zero factual basis. I think you've been reading too many conspiracy theories online. So you deny knowing Harrison Blackwood prior to this acquisition?" "I've known Harrison professionally for years. The tech community in Seattle is small." "And you deny having any involvement in his late daughter-in-law's car accident?" Whitmore's expression hardened. "Grace Blackwood died in a tragic accident caused by a drunk driver. To suggest otherwise is both offensive and libelous. Security, please remove this woman." 2 guards moved toward Viv. She stood, letting them escort her toward the exit, having done exactly what they'd planned, created the distraction that allowed Nate to move. He slipped through the crowd, angling toward the side door Whitmore would use to exit. The press conference dissolved into chaos, journalists shouting questions, cameras following Viv's removal. In the confusion, Nate positioned himself in the corridor outside the ballroom waiting. Whitmore emerged 3 minutes later, flanked by 2 security guards, face tight with barely controlled rage. He was reaching for his phone when Nate stepped into his path. "Montgomery, we need to talk." Whitmore's head snapped up. Recognition flickered, then calculation. His hand gestured and the security team moved to intercept, but Whitmore stopped them again. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm surprised you'd show your face. There's a warrant for your arrest." "I'm aware. I'm also aware you killed my father last night." Nate kept his voice level, projecting defeated resignation. "I'm done fighting. You win. I just want to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "The evidence Harrison collected. I have it all: bank records, communications, everything that proves Project Serpent existed. I'll give it to you along with my silence in exchange for letting me and Vivian Harper disappear. No more hunting us, no more threats. We vanish, and you get to bury the past forever." Whitmore studied him with eyes that had spent decades reading people for weakness. Nate let him see exhaustion defeat the genuine grief over his father's death. The wire pressed against his chest felt like a brand. "You expect me to believe you'd just walk away after everything?" "I expected my father to have Alzheimer's. I expected my arrest to be legitimate. I expected a lot of things that turned out to be lies." Nate pulled out the safety deposit box key. "This is what Harrison gave me. Says it's where he kept the originals. You get this, you get everything." Whitmore's eyes locked on the key. "Hungry. Where's the box?" "First National, downtown Seattle. Box 547. The lie came easily. "But I need your word. We walk away. You stop sending people to kill us." "My word." Whitmore's laugh carried no warmth. "You want the word of a man you just accused of murder. I want the word of a man who's smart enough to know when he's won. You've already destroyed my reputation, my company, my family. Take the evidence and let me have what's left of my life." Whitmore moved closer, voice dropping to the conspiratorial register of someone sharing victory. "You really don't understand, do you? I don't make deals with dead men, and you, Nathaniel, have been a dead man since your wife's brakes were cut." The admission hung in the air. Nate's wire caught every syllable, transmitting to Emily's team, to federal agents who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "You're saying you killed Grace." "I'm saying your father needed motivation to stay compliant. Grace was leverage. When Harrison tried to back out of Project Serpent, we showed him how easily leverage could be broken. The drunk driver was a nice touch, gave the whole thing plausible deniability." "And my father, the heart attack." "Doctor, Peterson was very accommodating once we explained the alternative. Potassium injection looks exactly like cardiac arrest in elderly patients. Harrison knew too much, and his moment of lucidity made him dangerous." Whitmore smiled. "Just like you're dangerous now. The difference is I'm not going to let you walk away with evidence that could destroy 20 years of careful construction." Nate's hand trembled as he held up the key. "Then take it. Take everything. Just let us go." "That's where you misunderstand power, Nathaniel. It's not about making deals. It's about eliminating threats." Whitmore signaled his security. "Take him. Make it look like he resisted arrest. Once he's in custody, we'll handle the Harper woman separately." The guards moved. Nate saw their hands going for weapons, saw the calculation in their eyes that said they'd done this before. His own hand dropped to his phone finger, finding the panic button that would signal Emily's team. FBI agents burst through 3 doors simultaneously, weapons drawn, voices commanding everyone on the ground. Whitmore's security team hesitated, caught between training and the sudden appearance of federal authority. Emily Hutchinson strode through the chaos, badge held high. "Montgomery Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, securities fraud, and about 15 other charges I'm going to enjoy adding. You have the right to remain silent." Whitmore's face cycled through shock, rage, calculation. "This is entrapment, illegal recording. Nothing you just heard is admissible. Public corridor, no reasonable expectation of privacy, and you voluntarily confessed to multiple felonies." Emily's smile was sharp. "My team's been listening to every word. You're done, Monty. Finally, after all these years, you're actually done." Handcuffs clicked. Whitmore's security team surrendered weapons, and Nate stood in the corridor wire still transmitting, watching the man who'd killed Grace being led away in restraints. Viv appeared at his side. "You got it." "Every word." His voice came out hollow. "He confessed to all of it." "Then why do you look like we lost?" "Because Grace is still dead. Because Harrison spent 20 years in prison of Whitmore's making. Because justice doesn't bring back the people you love, it just makes their absence feel slightly less meaningless." He said none of that. "We won. That's what matters." 6 months later, Nate stood in federal court as the jury foreman read the verdict. Guilty on all 43 counts. Montgomery Whitmore showed no reaction, but his lawyer's face told the story: decades in prison, assets seized, empire dissolved. Cassandra Winters had already pled out, testifying against Whitmore in exchange for 25 years instead of life. 6 board members faced their own trials. Project Serpent unraveled thread by thread, taking down executives across 3 states. Outside the courthouse, Viv waited with her camera crew. The Washington Post had run her story after all once the arrests gave them legal cover. She'd won the Pulitzer 3 weeks ago, standing on a stage in New York, accepting recognition for journalism that had cost her father his life and nearly cost her hers. "How does it feel?" she asked when Nate emerged. "Like I can finally breathe." He looked at Seattle's skyline, the city that had watched his family rise and fall and rise again. "What about you? Ready for your next investigation?" "Actually, I'm taking a break. Thought I might try something less likely to get me killed." Her smile carried weight. "Maybe stay in Seattle. See if there's a future here that doesn't involve running from billionaire assassins." They'd been dancing around this for months, the relationship that had started with a slap and evolved through shared trauma into something neither could quite name. Nate had spent the time rebuilding Blackwood Technologies, this time with ethics oversight and a board he couldn't manipulate. Viv had written her stories, testified at trials, become the public face of investigative journalism that actually changed things. But in quiet moments, late-night calls after difficult depositions, they'd found something that looked like the beginning of trust. "My daughter wants to meet you," Nate said. "Officially, not just as the journalist who exposed my family's secrets." "That's terrifying." "She's 16. Everything's terrifying." He paused. "But I told her about the slap. How you were the first person in 3 years to tell me the truth without caring whether I liked it. She said anyone brave enough to slap a CEO probably deserved respect." Viv laughed, the sound carrying echoes of the woman who'd walked into his office 4 months ago looking for answers. "When?" "Tonight. Dinner. Nothing fancy, just family meal at the house." He met her eyes. "If that's too much, too fast." "It's not. I'll be there." Garrett appeared from the courthouse grinning. "Verdicts trending on Twitter. Whitmore's going to die in prison. Cassandra's already filed appeals. She won't win. And Project Serpent is becoming a business school case study in corporate corruption. I'd call that a win." "What about you? Ready to go back to corporate security?" "Actually, Juliet and I are starting a firm, consulting for companies that want to avoid becoming the next Blackwood Technologies. Ethics, compliance, whistleblower protection, that kind of thing." Garrett's expression sobered. "Figure it's what Harrison would have wanted. Use his mistakes to help others avoid the same traps." Nate thought about his father, lucid at the end, handing over evidence he'd gathered at tremendous cost. Harrison Blackwood had been many things: weak, compromised, complicit in crimes that destroyed lives. But in his final hours he'd chosen redemption over survival. That had to count for something. The press wanted statements. Nate gave them what they needed: gratitude for justice, commitment to transparency, hope that this verdict would deter future corruption. The words came easily because they were true, even if truth was more complicated than sound bites allowed. Evening found him at Riverside Memory Care, standing in the room that had been Harrison's last home. The staff had cleaned it, prepared it for the next resident who would slowly lose themselves to neurological erosion. But Nate had requested one final visit before they cleared his father's belongings. Grace's photograph sat on the dresser, the one Harrison had kept through everything their wedding day, both of them young and unbroken by what was coming. Nate picked it up, studying her smile. "We got him," he said to the empty room. "Whitmore's going to prison. Everyone involved is facing consequences. It doesn't bring you back, but maybe it means you didn't die for nothing." Isabel appeared in the doorway. "Dad, Viv's downstairs. Says she's early but didn't want to wait in the car." "Tell her I'll be right down." He set the photograph in his pocket. "And Isabel, your grandfather wanted you to know he was proud of you. Even when he couldn't remember your name, he remembered being proud." His daughter's eyes glistened. "Do you think he would have liked Viv?" Nate considered. "I think he would have respected anyone brave enough to slap sense into me." They left together, father and daughter, carrying the weight of everything that had been lost and the fragile promise of what might still be built. Downstairs, Viv waited by her car, looking uncertain in a way she never had when facing corporate conspiracies. "Hi, I brought wine. Wasn't sure if that's appropriate for family dinner with a teenager, but it's perfect." Nate took the bottle, gestured toward his car. "Ride with us. I'll bring you back for yours later." She hesitated, then nodded. Isabel claimed the front seat with teenage territorial instinct, forcing Viv into the back. But as they drove through Seattle's evening traffic heading toward the house that still felt too empty without Grace, conversation flowed easier than Nate had expected. Isabel asked about the Pulitzer, about what it felt like to expose corruption, whether journalism was always this dangerous. Viv answered honestly, "Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's worth it. Yes, there are days when you wonder if truth matters, when it can't bring back the dead." At the house, Nate cooked while Viv and Isabel set the table. Simple pasta, Grace's recipe, the kind of meal that felt like memory and hope tangled together. They ate and talked and carefully avoided the topics that hurt too much: Harrison's death, the trial's emotional toll, the relationship Nate and Viv were building from the rubble of everything they'd lost. After dinner, Isabel excused herself to homework that was probably just giving the adults space. Nate and Viv stood on the deck overlooking the water, Seattle's lights painting patterns across Puget Sound. "Thank you for coming tonight," Nate said quietly. "I know this is complicated." "Everything's complicated. That doesn't make it wrong." Viv leaned against the railing. "I spent 10 years preparing to destroy your family. Now I'm having dinner with your daughter and wondering if I remembered to turn off my coffee maker." "That's progress." "That's terrifying." She turned to face him. "Nate, I need to know, are we doing this because we survived something horrible together, or because we actually see a future?" The question deserved honesty. Nate thought about the slap, about the moment she'd stood in his office and demanded respect instead of accepting harassment. He thought about her risking everything to expose Whitmore, about the way she'd comforted him when Harrison died, about the quiet competence she brought to everything from journalism to setting tables. "I think we're doing this because you remind me that I can be better than my worst impulses. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I wanted to be before grief made me forget." He moved closer. "And because the future feels less empty when you're in it." Viv's eyes searched his face. "That's either the most romantic thing I've heard, or the saddest. Can't it be both?" She kissed him, then the gesture feeling both inevitable and surprising. Different from the slap, but equally honest, a choice made with full knowledge of everything it meant and everything it risked. When they separated, Nate's phone buzzed. Text from Emily Whitmore, sentenced. 40 years, no parole. He'll die in prison. Justice served. He showed it to Viv, watched her read it, watched tears form that she didn't bother hiding. "My father would have been proud," she whispered. "He spent his career chasing men like Whitmore, never got to see one actually face consequences. He'd be proud of you, for finishing what he started, for being brave enough to risk everything for truth." They stood together as darkness settled over Seattle, as the city began its nightly transformation into light and shadow. Inside, Isabel's music played faintly, something contemporary and incomprehensible to Nate's 47-year-old sensibilities, but alive in a way that felt like hope. Grace's photograph rested in his pocket, a weight he'd carry forever. Harrison's sacrifice had bought them this moment, This fragile peace, this tentative future, this chance to build something good from the ruins of everything that had been broken. It wasn't redemption. Redemption required earning back what you'd lost, and the dead stayed dead regardless of verdicts. But it was something. A beginning, perhaps, or just the courage to keep moving forward when staying still meant drowning in everything you couldn't change. Viv's hand found his. What happens now? Nate thought about all the possible answers, trials to finish companies, to rebuild relationships, to navigate grief, to process futures, to imagine. But only one answer mattered in this moment. Now we live. We remember the people we lost, we honor what they fought for, and we build something worthy of their sacrifice. He squeezed her hand. Together, if you're willing. I'm willing. Her voice carried the same determination that had made her slap him months ago, the same refusal to accept less than truth. But fair warning, if you ever touch me without permission again, the second slap will be harder. Noted. Nate smiled, the expression feeling genuine for the first time since Grace died. Though I should mention that first slap changed my life. Good, that was the point. They went inside to join Isabel, 3 people carrying different scars from the same war, finding their way toward something that looked like family. Outside, Seattle continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to human drama, but offering the possibility, fragile and imperfect, that sometimes the right people at the right time could make the difference between survival and surrender. Whitmore would die in prison. Cassandra would serve decades. Project Serpent was dismantled, its architects facing consequences that once seemed impossible. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance the scales against Grace's death, Harrison's coerced complicity, David Harper's murder. But it was something. And sometimes something was all you got.